My hands were shaking so badly I had to set down my coffee mug before I dropped it on the kitchen floor. It wasn't the pregnancy nausea this time. I was 14 weeks along, and the morning sickness had mostly faded by then. No, what made my hands shake was the voice coming through the thin wall of our home office. My husband's voice, low and careful, the way he sounded when he thought no one could hear him. I had only gotten up to use the bathroom. That was it. Just a quick trip down the hall at 2 in the morning, the way I did every single night now that there was something the size of a lemon pressing against my bladder. I wasn't supposed to hear anything. I wasn't supposed to stop walking, but I did stop, because I heard my name, and then I heard what came after it. Let me back up, because none of this will make sense without the full picture. My name is Lydia, I'm 32 years old, and until 8 months ago I would have told you I had a good life. A quiet, steady, genuinely good life. I grew up in Kitchener, Ontario. The kind of mid-sized city where everyone knows the same landmarks, the same shortcuts, the same Tim Hortons on every corner. My parents were both teachers. My dad taught history at a secondary school for 30 years. My mum taught grade 4. I was their only child, and I grew up understanding two things deeply: that education was everything, and that you showed up for the people you loved. I became a registered nurse. I worked in a cardiac care unit at a hospital in Waterloo for 6 years. It's not glamorous work. It's exhausting, sometimes heartbreaking, occasionally terrifying, but I was good at it. I knew how to read monitors, how to talk to frightened families, how to stay calm when everything around me was falling apart. I thought those skills only mattered at work. I was wrong about that. I met my husband at a fundraiser for the hospital foundation. One of those autumn gala events where everyone wears dark colors and drinks wine they can't quite afford and pretends to understand the silent auction items. He was there with a colleague. He laughed at something I said about the cheese board, a genuinely quick, unperformed laugh, and we ended up talking for 3 hours. His name is Connor. He's 37. He works in commercial real estate, the kind that involves large office buildings and long negotiations and a lot of flying to Toronto for meetings. He's good-looking in a quiet way, dark hair going gray at the temples, the kind of hands that look like they could fix things even though he'd be the first to admit he cannot. He was kind to waitstaff. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He called when he said he would call. We dated for 2 years. We got engaged at a cottage near Tobermory, just the two of us, on a Friday evening when the sky over Georgian Bay was doing something extraordinary with the light. We got married the following September in a small ceremony outside Cambridge. My dad cried during the vows. My mum pretended she wasn't crying, which meant she was definitely crying. I thought I knew what our life was going to look like. We'd been trying to get pregnant for almost a year when it finally happened. I found out on a Tuesday morning in February, standing in our bathroom in my scrubs before a 7 a.m. shift, staring at a test result I had to read 3 times before I believed it. I sat down on the edge of the tub and put my hand over my mouth and I just breathed for a while. Then I called Connor at work even though I'd promised myself I'd tell him in person because I couldn't hold it in for another 12 hours. He cried on the phone. "That's the part I keep coming back to," he cried. The first trimester was hard. I was exhausted in a way that felt cellular, like my body had been reprogrammed for a single purpose. I cut back my shifts at the hospital. Connor took on more of the household responsibilities without being asked. Grocery runs, cooking on weeknights, making sure I had what I needed before I even thought to ask for it. We told our parents at the 8-week scan. We told his sister at 10 weeks. His sister, I need to tell you about her. Her name is Paige. She's 34, 2 years younger than Connor. She lives in Guelph with her husband, a man named Owen who sells insurance and collects vintage hockey cards and has, in the 4 years I've known him, never once asked me a single question about my life. I always assumed that was just how Owen was, quiet, self-contained, uninterested in people outside his immediate circle. I understand now that it wasn't disinterest, it was calculation. Paige and Owen had been trying to have a child for 6 years. I knew this. Connor had told me early in our relationship with the kind of careful, factual tone people use when they're describing something painful without wanting to perform the pain. They'd gone through 3 rounds of IVF. None of them had worked. The last attempt had ended badly enough that Paige had taken 3 months off work and Owen had, according to Connor, become someone he barely recognized for a while. I felt for them. I genuinely did. There is nothing I can say now that would make that sound true, I realize. But it was Connor's parents are financially comfortable in the particular way of people who made careful decisions over many decades rather than any single windfall. His father, a retired engineer, had built up a modest investment portfolio over 40 years. When he died 2 years before Connor and I met, he left behind an estate worth just over $1.2 million, split in his will equally between Connor and Paige, with one condition. The condition was this: the inheritance would be held in trust until each of them had a child. It wasn't a malicious clause. Connor's father had been a deeply family-oriented man who simply wanted the money used for the next generation. The trust was administered by a lawyer in Guelph. Both Connor and Paige knew about it. It had never seemed like a significant thing to me because Connor and I were already trying to start a family and the money felt distant and procedural. I was wrong to think it was procedural. At 14 weeks, I went in for a routine prenatal appointment. The ultrasound technician was quiet for a moment longer than felt comfortable, and then she turned the screen toward me and said, very gently, that she was seeing 2 gestational sacs. Twins. I stared at the screen. I counted. 2 distinct, flickering heartbeats, side by side like a pair of small, determined lights. I called Connor from the parking lot and I could hear in his voice the same thing I felt, this enormous, slightly terrifying expansion of something that had already felt overwhelming. We were having twins. We were going to be a family of 4. We told Paige and Owen 2 days later, over dinner at their house in Guelph. I remember watching Paige's face. She smiled. She said all the right things. She hugged me at the door when we left and said she was so happy for us. But something in her eyes didn't match her voice. I noticed it and I filed it away and I told myself I was being paranoid. Hormones, projection. She was going through something hard. Of course she might have complicated feelings about my pregnancy. That didn't mean anything was wrong. That was the last time I trusted my instincts for a while. Over the following weeks, Paige began inserting herself into the pregnancy in ways that felt supportive at first and then started to feel something else. She offered to drive me to appointments when Connor was traveling. She wanted to come to the anatomy scan. She suggested specific OB practices, a specific hospital, a specific midwife she'd heard good things about through what she described as a support group for women with fertility challenges. She recommended a prenatal supplement brand I'd never heard of and dropped off a 3-month supply without being asked. I took the supplements for 2 weeks before I stopped. Not because I was suspicious, I wasn't, not yet, but because my own prenatal vitamins were already covered under my health benefits plan, and I didn't see the point of switching. Paige seemed mildly disappointed when I mentioned this casually. I didn't think much of it at the time. Connor's work travel intensified around this point. A large commercial lease negotiation in Mississauga, then a site visit in Calgary, then back to Toronto for 3 days. I was 16 weeks pregnant with twins and working reduced hours and spending a lot of evenings alone in our house in Waterloo, which I had started to find too quiet in a way that bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Then came the Wednesday night that changed everything. I woke up at 2:14 a.m. I know the exact time because I checked the clock on the nightstand before I got up, a habit from years of shift work. Connor was home. I could feel the warmth of him on his side of the bed, the familiar rhythm of his breathing. I went down the hall to the bathroom, passing the closed door of his home office. The door wasn't quite closed, not fully. There was a gap of maybe an inch, and through that gap came a pale line of light, and his voice. He wasn't speaking loudly. He was doing the opposite, keeping his voice at a deliberate low level, the kind of low that only happens when you are trying not to be heard. I stopped moving without deciding to stop. My hand came up and rested against the wall. "She won't ask questions," he was saying. "She trusts you completely, that's what makes this possible." A pause. He was listening to someone. "I know the timing is tight, I know that. But if we're careful about how it's documented, there's no reason anyone would ever." Another pause. "Paige, I need you to trust me on this. Both babies are still viable." The doctor confirmed it. "We just need to make sure that when the time comes, the transfer happens before anyone can." I stopped breathing. I stood in the hallway in the dark, my hand against the wall, my heart doing something wrong and too fast in my chest, and I listened to my husband describe what he and his sister intended to do. They were going to take one of my babies, not metaphorically, not in some custody dispute after a future separation. Now, during the birth, the plan, as I pieced it together from Connor's side of the call, involved a doctor who had agreed to be involved. Someone connected to a private clinic Paige had been working with and a staged stillbirth. One twin would be reported as having been born still. The other would be placed with Paige and Owen as a private adoption, with paperwork that would create a false biological claim. Both children would survive, but I would be told that one of them had died. And Paige would have a child, a biological-looking heir for the trust, and Connor would have helped her do it. I want to describe what that moment felt like, but I don't think I can, not really. There is no frame of reference I have for what it is to stand in a dark hallway and understand that the person breathing 20 feet away from you, the person you sleep beside, the person who cried when you called to say you were pregnant, that person has been doing this, has been planning this, has looked at you over dinner and driven you to appointments and rubbed your back when you couldn't sleep and has been planning this the entire time. I made myself breathe, slowly, quietly. I went back to bed. I lay down beside my husband. I did not touch him. I spent the rest of that night staring at the ceiling, running through everything I knew, everything I'd noticed, everything I'd dismissed. The supplements I'd stopped taking, had those been something? The specific hospital Paige had recommended. Why that one? The doctor she'd mentioned through the support group. By the time the light started coming through the curtains, I had made two decisions. The first was that I was not going to say a single word to Connor about what I had heard. The second was that I was going to take this apart piece by piece methodically until I had everything I needed, and then I was going to burn it all to the ground. I called in to work that morning and arranged an extended leave I'd been meaning to book anyway. Then I called the one person I trusted completely outside of Connor, my friend Jess, who I'd gone to nursing school with and who now worked in healthcare administration and understood how systems worked, how documentation worked, how gaps in documentation could be exploited. I didn't tell her everything on that call. I told her enough. I told her I needed help, and I told her it was serious, and she said, without asking me to explain further, that was the beginning. Over the next 6 weeks, I built a file. I got the name of the doctor who'd been recommended. It took 3 separate conversations with people in Paige's support group before I found a woman who'd left the group and was willing to talk, and then I looked him up. Dr. Raymond Fitch, licensed in Ontario. No disciplinary record with the College of Physicians and Surgeons, which surprised me until Jess pointed out that only meant he hadn't been caught yet. He operated out of a private fertility clinic in Mississauga that had received 2 complaints in the previous 3 years, both related to documentation irregularities. Neither had gone anywhere. I hired a lawyer, not a family lawyer, a criminal defense lawyer who a colleague of Jess's had recommended, a woman in Toronto named Frances Okafor who had dealt with medical fraud cases before. I met with Frances on a Wednesday afternoon while Connor thought I was at a prenatal yoga class. I sat across from her and I laid out everything I knew, and she listened without interrupting, and when I was done she said, "We need to get this to the right people before your due date." By the right people, she meant the Ontario Provincial Police, and depending on how the evidence developed, potentially the RCMP, because the financial dimension of the plan, the trust, the fraudulent inheritance claim crossed into territory that went beyond provincial jurisdiction. Frances was very clear with me about what I needed. I needed Connor on record. Not just my account of a conversation I'd overheard through a partially open door at 2 a.m. I needed him to say it where it could be documented. This is the part I find hardest to talk about. Because what came next required me to spend 6 more weeks living inside my marriage as though nothing had happened. Sleeping in the same bed, having dinner at the table, letting him put his hand on my stomach when the babies moved, smiling at the right moments. I am a cardiac nurse. I have held people's hands while they received the worst news of their lives and kept my face steady so they could fall apart without worrying about me. I know how to partition myself. It is a skill I developed over years, and I have never been grateful for it before, and I am still not sure that I am. I began keeping notes on my personal phone, a device Connor didn't have access to. Time-stamped, detailed, recording anything he said that related to Paige, the pregnancy, the birth plan. I noted the 2 occasions he steered our conversation toward the specific hospital Paige had recommended. I noted the evening he suggested casually that maybe we should transfer my prenatal care there because it was newer and better equipped for multiple births, which was not only untrue but directly contradicted what my own OB had told me. The break came at 32 weeks. Jess had been monitoring the private clinic in Mississauga through a contact she had there. Someone who'd become uncomfortable with what they were seeing and had agreed to document certain things on the condition of anonymity. Through this contact, we obtained evidence that Dr. Fitch had received 3 wire transfers in the preceding 4 months from an account registered to a numbered company in Owen's name. The transfers totaled $48,000. Frances took this to the OPP. What happened next moved faster than I expected. The OPP worked with financial crimes investigators to trace the numbered company. It led back through 2 layers of holding structures to Owen's personal accounts, combined with the records from the clinic and a recorded phone call between Dr. Fitch and someone whose voice analysis matched Page's, obtained legally. Through the investigation, the case became, in Francis's words, solid. They waited. They wanted Connor too. At 34 weeks, Connor sat across from me at our kitchen table and told me he thought I should reconsider the birth plan. He thought I should agree to deliver at the clinic in Mississauga rather than my hospital. He said Dr. Fitch was one of the best in the province for high-risk multiple births. He used the phrase peace of mind 4 times in 10 minutes. I looked at him across the table. I thought about the person I had been a year ago, standing in a hospital parking lot calling him to say I was pregnant, listening to him cry. I said I'd think about it. 3 days later, the OPP executed search warrants on the clinic, on Owen and Page's home in Guelph, and on Connor's home office. They came at 6 in the morning. I was already awake. I had not really slept in weeks. I sat on the edge of our bed with my hands on my stomach while I listened to officers moving through our house, and I felt both of my babies move, a double kick, left and right, like they were checking in with me, and I made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something else entirely. Connor was arrested on charges including conspiracy to commit fraud, conspiracy to endanger the life of an infant, and participation in a scheme to fraudulently claim an inheritance trust. Owen was charged with fraud over $5,000 and conspiracy. Dr. Fitch lost his medical license within 48 hours of the warrants being executed, pending a full college investigation, and faces criminal charges related to his role in the scheme. Page was charged as well, conspiracy to commit fraud and complicity in a plan that, had it proceeded, would have involved falsifying a birth certificate and a death certificate. I want to be clear about something. I did not feel triumphant that morning. I did not feel relief. I felt something closer to grief. The specific grief of losing something you already believed in, something you'd built your future around. That feeling didn't go away quickly. It hasn't fully gone away. But here is what else happened. My parents drove from Kitchener that afternoon when I called them. My mom walked in the door and didn't say anything. She just put her arms around me, and I stood there in my entryway at 34 weeks pregnant with twins. And I cried for the first time since the night I stood in that dark hallway and heard what I heard. My dad went quietly into the kitchen and made tea and started clearing out the freezer to make space, because he is my father, and making space is what he knows how to do when someone he loves needs room to fall apart. I moved to my parents' house in Kitchener for the final weeks of my pregnancy. I had a lawyer, I had my OB, I had Jess, who came down from Guelph twice a week and sat with me and watched bad television and didn't make me talk about it unless I wanted to. I delivered at 38 weeks and 2 days at Grand River Hospital in Kitchener. It was a long labor, 11 hours, and I had an epidural at hour 6, and I am not ashamed of that. My mum was in the room. My dad waited in the hall and paced, which is what he did when I had my tonsils out at age 9, and apparently some things don't change. I have a daughter, I have a son. They are both perfect and furious and loud about it, which I find deeply reassuring. I named my daughter Cecily, which is a name I have loved since I was a child, and a character in a play my mum took me to see when I was 7. I named my son Theodore, after my father, who turned the color of a boiled lobster when I told him and then had to go stand in the kitchen again. Connor's case is before the courts. I won't get into the details of ongoing legal proceedings, but I will say that Frances is very good at her job and the evidence is not in question. The same is true for Paige and Owen and Dr. Fitch. The inheritance trust, as it turns out, is no longer relevant to anyone. Connor's access to his portion is tied up in the legal proceedings. Page's portion is similarly frozen. The trust administrator, a quiet, meticulous man in Guelph who had no knowledge of any of this, is cooperating fully with the investigation. I am not entitled to any part of Connor's inheritance, nor do I want it. What I want and what I have is simpler than that. I want to walk into the kitchen in the morning and find 2 small people who have no idea yet about any of this, who only know that they are warm and fed and that someone is coming when they cry. I want to take them to Kitchener's Victoria Park when the weather gets better and let them look at the ducks the way I did when I was their age. I want to drive them past my old school and tell them their grandpa taught history there for 30 years and their grandma taught little kids how to read just down the road. I want to sit in the rocking chair I bought for the nursery, the one my dad assembled incorrectly at first and then correctly after consulting YouTube, and do the 2 a.m. feeding in the quiet of the house while my parents sleep down the hall, and feel the particular stillness of that. I am a cardiac nurse. I know that hearts are more resilient than people think. I know they can take a lot of damage and keep beating. I know that the rhythm can be disrupted, thrown completely off, and with the right intervention can find its way back. Cecily and Theodore are 4 months old. They are both healthy. They are both here. That is the only ending I needed.